He never gave a name when he checked in. Paid cash, didn't ask about the hot tub, the Wi-Fi, nothing. Just slid the clipboard back across the counter and asked which rooms had the fewest windows. I remember the way he looked at the snow piling up outside, not like someone trying to get in out of the storm, but someone hiding from it. 3 nights later, room 6 was empty. The key was inside on the nightstand, and the door had been locked from the inside. If you've ever worked a night shift somewhere remote, you'll understand. And if these stories help pass the quiet hours, consider following so you don't miss the next one. My name's Dana Ellis. I was 37 at the time, managing guest services at Pine Bough Lodge up near Leadville, Colorado. That was back in 2006, before the expansion, before the ski crowd started showing up in droves. Back then, it was mostly snowmobilers, hunters, or couples trying to get off the grid. The kind of place where you'd go 2 days without seeing another car pass on the access road. I worked the evening desk most weeks. My coworker, Len Turner, covered nights. He was ex-Air Force. A quiet man himself, always had a paperback in his back pocket and a thermos full of bitter coffee. We got along fine. Not friends exactly, but friendly enough to watch each other's backs when the snow came in too heavy or a guest got drunk and mouthy. That week, a nor'easter had pushed over the mountains, and the forecast warned of 3 to 5 feet by Friday. We started turning away new bookings by Wednesday morning. I remember that clearly because it was just after I got off the phone with a couple from Grand Junction when the front door opened hard, like the wind had shoved it, and he stepped inside. The man was tall, gaunt but not sick-looking. He wore a long gray coat dusted in snow and one of those old fur-lined hats with the flaps down over his ears. Didn't take it off when he came in. He didn't make eye contact either, just stood in front of the counter while I put the phone down and greeted him. I asked if he had a reservation. He said no. Asked how long he planned to stay. 3 nights, he said. Then he pulled out an envelope of 20s and counted the full amount exact change onto the counter. No small talk, no questions about amenities, just a quiet nod when I told him room 6 was one of the few units without any outside-facing windows. That struck me even then. Most folks wanted the corner rooms for the view, especially when the pines were coated in fresh powder. But this guy didn't even look toward the windows. He just took the key, turned, and walked down the hallway like he already knew the layout. Room 6 was near the back next to the laundry chute. No balcony, no sliding glass, just a single narrow window that looked out at the slope behind the property. A rock wall and pine scrub. No reason to pick it unless you didn't want to be seen. I made a note to let Len know about him, not because he did anything wrong, but because you learn to spot the ones who might need watching. We'd had people on the run before. An old lady once checked in with 2 suitcases and a wedding dress. She said she was returning. Stayed 4 days without speaking to anyone and left her key taped to the front door with a note that just said, "Thank you for the silence." People bring strange baggage to places like ours, emotional and otherwise. That night, the snow started coming down in heavy sheets. Visibility dropped to near 0. By the time I handed off to Len at 10, I told him the new guy was in 6, prepaid, quiet, and maybe just riding something out. Len nodded, didn't say much, just jotted the room number on his notepad. The next morning, I checked the logs. Nothing out of place, no late calls, no complaints. But I did notice room 6 hadn't triggered any motion lights in the hallway. Normally, when a guest goes to grab ice or walk down to the vending machine, the sensors pick it up. But that section of the hall had stayed dark all night. No water usage either. Toilet hadn't flushed. Shower hadn't run. Day 2, same thing. The snow was still falling. Len said he hadn't seen the guy at all. No noise, no light under the door. No "do not disturb" sign either. But the key was never returned. We don't use cards. It's all still old metal keys on brass hooks, so I'd have seen if it came back. I started to wonder if he'd left, maybe slipped out early and driven off. But I walked the lot that afternoon, and there was still a truck parked in the back, coated in snow. A silver Dodge, no plates. Just a dealer sticker in the back window from somewhere in Utah. There weren't any tire tracks leaving the lot. Just wind drifts 2 feet deep in places. I knocked that evening. No answer. Len tried again around midnight and said he thought he heard something, a kind of scraping sound. Not movement exactly, like metal on wood, but when he called out, it stopped. We debated calling the sheriff, but unless there was a smell or signs of violence, they wouldn't come out in that weather. We gave it one more night. On the morning of day 3, the snow finally let up. Sunlight came through for the first time in 48 hours. It was bright, but not warm. The kind of light that makes everything feel overexposed. I walked down to room 6 around 9:30 a.m. The door was shut, nothing unusual. But when I knocked, it swung inward with no resistance. The lock wasn't broken. In fact, it was engaged from the inside chain latch, slid shut, deadbolt turned. But no one was there. The room was empty. Bed untouched. No sign anyone had slept there. Not a single item left behind. Even the trash can was empty. The key sat on the nightstand exactly where I'd placed the room service menu. When I first stocked it, Len and I searched the place top to bottom. The bathroom, the closet, under the bed. No footprints on the carpet. No soap moved from the holder. The window was locked from the inside. We checked the security cameras, but that hallway hadn't recorded anything past his initial check-in. No entry, no exit. The only thing out of place was the closet door. It creaked a little when I opened it. Inside, the coat hanger was bent, not broken, just curved strangely. Like someone had hung something impossibly heavy on it for a long time. Len stayed quiet as we stood there. He pointed out that the snow on the Dodge hadn't shifted. No one had scraped it. No one had touched it. We finally called the sheriff that afternoon, but by the time they arrived, the truck was gone. Not driven out gone. Just tire-shaped indentations in the snow slowly filling in with wind. They took our statements, but there wasn't much to say. No ID, no name on the guest log, no fingerprints left behind. Just a room that had been locked from the inside, and a guest who never existed in the first place. I still have the key. Not sure why I kept it, but it's in my desk drawer at home. Brass tag. Room 6. And the weirdest thing, that bent hanger. I straightened it before I closed the door that day. A week later, when I went back to check inventory, it was bent again. I used to pick up night fares around the industrial stretch of Kansas City, the part of town where everything feels too quiet after 10 p.m., even when the roads are dry and the lights still work. A lot of the buildings out there look like they haven't been used in years, and some haven't. I didn't mind that route. Most drivers avoided it, which meant less competition for me. And if you didn't spook easily, The pay wasn't half bad. This was in early October 2019. I remember because there was a warm front that week, and the nights were strangely mild. The kind of weather that makes the asphalt smell like wet dust. I was about 6 hours into a double shift when I got pinged for a pickup over on Belmore Avenue, one of those streets lined with hollowed-out factories and boarded-up loading docks. No name on the request, just a pin dropped at the edge of a block that had been mostly fenced off since I started driving there in 2015. I didn't question it at first. People call cabs from weird places. Maybe he was security or someone doing maintenance. When I pulled up, though, there weren't any lit offices or open doors. Just one man standing perfectly still beneath a flickering streetlight wearing a dark coat and holding a duffel bag. He waved once, stepped forward, and got in the back seat without saying a word. He looked to be in his 40s. Pale skin, clean-shaven, no visible scars or tattoos. Not the kind of guy you'd notice in a crowd. He didn't smell like booze or seem high, just drained. When I asked where he was headed, he paused a moment, then said, "Nowhere in particular. Just keep driving for a while. That happens sometimes. Folks going through something rough trying to clear their head." I told him it would be metered, and he nodded, then handed me 2 20s and said he didn't need change. I shrugged and started rolling. We drove up 18th and turned south toward the river loop. I kept the radio low, local jazz station playing something soft and slow. Every so often I'd glance at him in the mirror. He didn't look out the windows, didn't check his phone. Just sat there with that duffel in his lap, eyes open, watching the seat in front of him. After about 20 minutes, I figured I should check in. Asked if he wanted me to drop him somewhere specific. He shook his head once, then said, "Circle back. Take the same roads again." It was odd, but I didn't push. Money's money. So I looped us back through the district, same route, same turns. It was about midnight when he spoke again, voice just loud enough to hear over the tires. "Do you know the old transit warehouse on 5th, the one they condemned?" I said. "Yeah, I'd passed it plenty. Big brick building, boarded up, half the roof missing. Place had burned at some point, maybe a decade ago. Rumor was some squatter set up a grill in one of the loading bays and it got out of control. The city slapped 'Do Not Enter', signs all over it, but I still saw fresh footprints there from time to time." He nodded slowly. "Can you drive past it? Don't stop. Just go by it once." I said sure, turned down the next block, and took us past the warehouse. It looked the same as always, dark sunken with a few of those motion-triggered floodlights that don't really work. But the passenger shifted for the first time when we passed it, leaning just enough to glance out his window. I caught a glimpse of his face in the mirror. Not afraid, not curious. Something more like dread laced with hope, like he was waiting for a sign. We kept going, but about 2 blocks later he said it again. "Circle back." So I did. Drove the loop again. He watched every corner like he was tracking something that wasn't visible to anyone else. We must have passed that warehouse 5 or 6 times. Same speed, same angle. He never asked me to stop, never asked to get out. At one point, I asked if he was looking for someone. He said, "No, just making sure no one's looking for me." That's when my gut started getting tight. Not from anything he did exactly, but because the way he said it was too calm. Like he wasn't paranoid, just resigned. Around 12:45, he asked me to pull into a gas station on the edge of the district. The kind of place that only has 2 working pumps and a single bathroom you have to get a key for. He said he needed to use the restroom and would be back in a minute. I watched him go inside, bag still in hand. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The clerk came out to empty the trash, so I asked if the guy was still in there. The clerk gave me a look like I'd asked if anyone lived on the moon. "No one came in," he said. "You the only customer we've had since 10. I got out, checked the restroom myself. It was empty. No back door, no window. Just the smell of disinfectant and that buzzing overhead light. I checked the building. Nothing. I even walked around the side toward the ice chest and propane tanks. He was gone. I called it in, not 911, just dispatch. Told them a fare had disappeared mid-ride. The station had cameras, but the clerk said most didn't work. The one above the door looped back a few seconds every minute. The feed just skipped like it glitched. A patrol car showed up maybe 20 minutes later. The officer took my statement, had a look at the cameras. Told me this kind of thing happened more than people thought. Sometimes folks just wanted to vanish. Sometimes they were testing if they could. Before he left, he asked what time I'd picked the guy up. I said around 11:30. He got quiet for a second, then asked exactly where I'd picked him up. I pointed out the spot on Belmore just past the old rail crossing. He nodded slowly, then asked if I'd ever seen the warehouse up close. I said, "No, I just passed it now and then." He hesitated, then told me off the record that they'd found a body in that building 3 nights earlier. Male, early 40s, confirmed dead for at least 12 hours before the fire got reported. The cause wasn't clear yet, but there'd been signs of restraint. I asked what kind of restraint, and the officer just shook his head. Said, "Doesn't matter now. Whoever he was, he's not going anywhere." I still have the fare record on my app, a 38-mile loop through a district where no one lives anymore. No name, no payment profile. Just a pin on a dead street and an empty seat behind me. Sometimes I think about the way he kept watching the corners, watching them like they might move. And every once in a while, when I take a fare down Belmore after midnight, I glance at the rear view and see the imprint of someone who isn't there. I've spent most of my life around machines, semis graders, generators, anything heavy that rattles your bones when it kicks on. I worked nights for a long time, especially during my years with the roadside recovery outfit down near Goldfield. It's the kind of place you only end up if something goes wrong halfway between Las Vegas and Reno. Middle of the Nevada desert, where the wind chews holes through steel and the closest neighbor might be a radio tower. That's where this happened. August 2021. I was working a solo shift at the depot just outside of town. We kept a service trailer parked off a frontage road near the old mining fields, one of those forgotten stretches of highway where even the GPS struggles to lock on. The state still sent crews through now and then, but mostly it was people passing through or breaking down. That night, the call came in around 11:40 p.m. Dispatch said it was a potential mechanical failure. Southbound vehicle stalled near marker 218. 2 occupants. No cell reception on their end, but they'd hit the emergency beacon in one of the old mile posts, and it had pinged a signal. I grabbed the satellite tablet, tossed my tools in the truck, and headed out. The road was dead quiet. Blacktop smooth and hot even after dark, with nothing but my headlights and a cloudless sky overhead. I passed the old way station, then a shuttered gas stop that hadn't had a working pump since the Clinton administration. About 15 minutes in, I saw the hazard lights blinking ahead, dim red pulses, just off the shoulder near a sagging barbed wire fence. The vehicle was an older F-150 matte black, heavily tinted windows. No plates. That raised a flag. I slowed as I pulled up, kept my lights low, and stepped out. The driver's door creaked open before I said a word. A man stepped out, early 40s, maybe heavy build, shaved head. He didn't look scared or panicked, just impatient. He told me the truck stalled without warning. No power, no fuel, no crank. I asked if he had ID. He said it was in the glove box. Never offered to get it. A second man sat in the passenger seat. He didn't look up. Just stared ahead, arms folded. I couldn't see his face clearly, but something about his posture didn't sit right. He wasn't just tired or frustrated. He looked like he was waiting for something. I told the driver I'd take a look under the hood. He stepped aside, but not far. Watched me the whole time. Engine bay looked fine. Battery cables were tight, no fluid leaks, fuel line intact. But when I checked the ignition relay, I noticed the entire fuse panel was missing. Not broken, removed, clean. I stepped back and asked if they'd done any work on the truck themselves. He said no, then changed the subject. Asked if I had any water. That's when I realized the inside of the cab was unusually clean. No personal items, no food wrappers, no tools. Just an empty vehicle, spotless with two men in it, and no explanation. I told him I'd need to call it in standard protocol for roadside assistance with suspicious vehicle condition. He didn't argue, but his jaw tightened. I walked back to my truck, got on the satellite band, and called dispatch. Gave them the make location and mentioned the missing fuse panel. They put me on hold. A few minutes later, a voice came on. Not our usual guy. Woman's voice. Flat. Said to stay put, and that highway patrol was en route. I asked how long. She didn't answer right away. Just said, "Do not let them leave." I didn't like that. Not just the words, the way she said it. Like she was reading something off a list. When I looked back at the F-150, the driver was now leaning against the rear fender, just standing there. The passenger still hadn't moved. I kept my engine running and stayed in the cab with the door half open. I watched the clock tick for 16 straight minutes. Then a light appeared on the horizon. Not headlights, not at first. More like a glow, pale and stretched out. I thought maybe it was a patrol cruiser coming in off the service trail. But the closer it got, the more wrong it looked. The light wasn't bouncing off the road. It was just drifting, like fog made of light. The driver turned and looked toward it, then opened the truck door and sat back down. Both men stayed inside from then on. Didn't talk, didn't move. When the troopers finally arrived, it was with lights off and no siren, just a quiet approach, two cruisers pulling alongside my truck. One of the officers, tall guy, maybe mid-50s, motioned for me to stay seated. He and his partner walked to the F-150, spoke to the occupants briefly, then walked back. That's when things started feeling off the rails. The officer came to my window, didn't show a badge, didn't even ask my name. Just said, "We've got it from here. Go ahead and clear out." I asked if they needed my statement. He said, "You didn't see anything criminal, just vehicle trouble. You can head back now." But here's the thing. As I pulled away, I looked in the side mirror. The officers weren't inspecting the truck. They weren't talking to the two men. They were both just standing near the edge of the broken fence, staring out into the desert. I left that site at 1:04 a.m., got back to the depot by 1:40. No further calls came in. When I checked the logs the next day, there was no record of the dispatch, no entry for marker 218, no report filed under my shift code. I called the highway patrol office, spoke to a real officer. He told me they hadn't sent anyone to that location. No cruisers were deployed in my quadrant that night. I gave him the cruiser numbers I saw. He paused, then said both units had been decommissioned in 2018. I asked if they still had any records on the two men. He said no. But then he asked me something I wasn't expecting. Did either of them seem quiet, like they were watching for something I said? Yeah. They barely spoke. He told me, we've had 3 calls like that over the years. Same stretch of highway, same kind of vehicle. Doesn't show up on radar, doesn't show up on cameras. They're always just there. He told me not to go back if I could help it. Said the fence line near marker 218 was laid down across an old military exclusion zone. Not marked anymore. Said it's been known to cause interference. I've taken plenty of strange calls over the years. Folks stranded high, drunk, screaming at the sky. But I've never had a recovery vanish from the system. I've never had patrol cars that didn't exist wave me off. And I've never seen that glow again, not since that night. But sometimes when I drive past the old way station, I look to the east, out where the scrub breaks and the sand starts to roll, and I swear I can see tire tracks that weren't there before. I was 10 the first time I realized airports could be dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with planes. It was the summer of 1999, and my older brother Matthew had been put in charge of getting me from New York back to our grandparents in Ohio. He was 16, then tall and awkward, still learning how to act older than he felt. My parents trusted him enough to handle the trip, but I knew even then he was nervous. LaGuardia at night was a different place than the cheerful terminals you see in the daytime. The lights were harsher, everything humming louder, and most of the stores had their gates pulled down, leaving dark corners and echoing spaces. Our flight had been delayed 3 hours, which meant we were stuck in Concourse D long after most of the evening rush had cleared out. It was just us, a handful of travelers slumped in plastic chairs, and the staff who looked like they wished they were anywhere else. Matthew tried to keep me entertained with snacks and a paperback comic he bought from one of the last open kiosks. At some point, I wandered a little too far, following the sound of one of those floor polishers echoing down the hall. That's when I met Jerome. He was a janitor, thin, older, with a gray beard, and a voice that carried a softness you notice right away. He teased me for staring at the machine and asked if I wanted to help steer it. I shook my head shy, but he smiled and told me to stick close to my brother because not everyone in an airport is here to fly. I didn't really understand what he meant then. When I went back, Matthew was frowning. He had been watching a man across the waiting area. The man was dressed in a dark business suit, holding a briefcase, but he wasn't reading or making phone calls like everyone else. He was just watching. His eyes followed families lingered on children. And then they locked on me. Matthew pulled me closer and whispered that we were staying put until boarding. The man didn't approach right away. He paced the perimeter of the seating area, always keeping us in view. When the gate agent announced a small delay, he finally stepped forward and spoke directly to Matthew, asking if we were flying to Cleveland. His voice was calm, practiced, like he'd been rehearsing. He even said our flight number, which hadn't been posted yet. Matthew froze. The man smiled at me, then not him, and said our parents had asked him to keep an eye on us. He stretched out a hand like he expected me to take it. I remember the silence around us, how nobody else seemed to notice. I also remember Jerome, the janitor, appearing again at the far end of the concourse. He didn't say anything at first, just rolled his polisher to a stop and stood there watching. The man's smile faded slightly when he noticed him. Jerome walked over slow and steady and asked Matthew if we wanted to move closer to the counter where the cameras were brighter. The man in the suit didn't argue. He just adjusted his tie, muttered something about checking on another family, and walked away. We never saw him board. We never saw him again at the gate. But I can still feel the weight of his eyes, the way he spoke our flight number, like he'd pulled it out of thin air. When we finally boarded 2 hours later, Jerome caught Matthew's shoulder. He leaned in and said, "Don't trust anyone who already knows your plans." Then he went back to polishing the floor as if nothing had happened. I didn't understand until years later how close we might have come to walking out of that gate with the wrong person. But even now, whenever I hear boarding announcements, I think of that suited man smiling like he belonged there and waiting for someone to follow him. I used to work nights at a gas station on Highway 285, about 20 miles south of Alamosa. It wasn't the kind of job anyone dreams of having, but it paid steady enough, and at that point in my life, I needed quiet more than I needed money. I'd been through a divorce the year before, and the stillness of those empty highways at night seemed like something I could live with. The store itself was a squat concrete block, bright fluorescent lights buzzing inside and out, with only 2 pumps under a canopy that shook whenever the wind kicked up across the plains. We didn't get much traffic between midnight and dawn. Maybe a rancher running late, or a trucker who had pushed further than he should. Most nights I sat behind the counter with the scanner on, listening to the sheriff's deputies trade calls, while I refilled the coffee pots and checked the expiration dates on candy bars. It was around February of 2022 when I first noticed him, the man in the blue hoodie. He pulled in just after 3 in the morning, his headlights sweeping across the empty lot like every other customer. He parked at pump 2, came inside, and laid $12 on the counter. Not a word more than 12 on pump 2. His voice was flat, not tired exactly, but absent of anything you could hold on to. I rang him up, handed back his change, and he left. The second night he came again. Same time, same pump, same $12. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge that I might remember him. The following night again. And the night after that. Always at 3:17 in the morning. Always $12 on pump 2. By the end of the first week, I was rattled enough to mention it over the scanner during a quiet stretch. The dispatcher laughed and said maybe I was just grateful to see a paying customer. But one of the troopers, a guy named Keller, asked me to keep track of it. He said patterns like that usually meant something, though he didn't say what. I started writing it down in the logbook, daytime amount. I even noted his clothes, though they never changed. The blue hoodie, the same faded jeans, the scuffed sneakers. His gas tank was always nearly empty, yet he never seemed in a rush. He filled exactly $12 worth, hung up the nozzle, and drove off toward the state line. I couldn't help trying to catch a better look at him. His hood was always up his face, mostly in shadow. One night, when he leaned over the counter to set down his money, I realized his hands were trembling slightly. Not the shake of someone cold, but the unsteady rhythm of a person barely holding themselves together. After 2 weeks, Trooper Keller stopped by around dawn. He'd pulled the station's camera feeds from the last few nights. He showed me clips on his laptop. There was the man in the blue hoodie, clear as day, standing at the counter. But in 2 of the clips, the register screen didn't light up when I swore I had rung him through. In another, the pump showed 0. Gallons dispensed, even though I remembered hearing the click of the nozzle. Keller frowned and said the equipment must be glitching, but his voice didn't sound convinced. The next night, I tried to talk to the man. When he came in, I asked if he was headed to work somewhere. He paused just slightly, as if surprised I'd spoken at all. Then he said, "Almost there." That was it. He paid, filled, and drove away. That phrase stuck with me, echoing through the hours after he left. Almost there. By the 3rd week, Keller told me he had run the plates I had jotted down. They belonged to a sedan that had been listed as stolen 2 years earlier, halfway across the state. The car was never recovered. He told me not to approach him again, to just note the time and call if anything changed. On the 23rd night, the routine broke. I watched the clock as it slid past 3:10, then 3:15. The highway outside remained dark. At 3:17, exactly, the door chime rang. He hadn't pulled up to the pumps. He had just walked straight in from the side lot, carrying 12 crumpled dollars in his hand. He placed them on the counter and waited. I couldn't think of anything to say. The store felt colder than usual, though the heaters hummed above us. I rang up the transaction slowly, just to give myself a reason not to look up. When I slid the receipt across the counter, he didn't take it. He just whispered something I could barely catch. "It's enough." Then he turned and walked back out into the night. No car, no footsteps on the gravel, just gone. The cameras showed nothing, no man walking in, no one standing at the counter. The register recorded a cash payment of $12, time-stamped 3:17 a.m. Trooper Keller came out again, but by then there was nothing left to find. The bills were still in the drawer. The pump never dispensed a drop. I kept that shift for another 6 months, but he never came back. Still, every night at 3:17, I found myself glancing at pump 2, waiting for headlights that never appeared. Some nights I imagine he's still driving out there, circling the same stretch of highway, looking for a station that isn't there anymore. And other nights I wonder if he ever really left at all. I don't usually talk about this road trip anymore, not because I've forgotten, but because the memory comes back sharper than I'd like. Back in 2014, I was 27, and 3 of us from work had convinced Derek, the only one with a reliable car, to drive out to Arizona for the weekend. We didn't plan it much. It was supposed to be 4 friends, an old sedan, and a couple 100 miles of road with nothing on the agenda but laughing too loud and drinking too much when we got there. We left Tulsa on a Friday night, aiming to drive through until dawn. Derek took the wheel first. Marcus rode shotgun, and Joel and I stretched out in the back. The roads were wide open at that hour. Just the occasional semi-truck and the dim sodium glow of industrial parks we cut past before the planes opened up. Somewhere after midnight, we missed a turn, and Derek swore the GPS was giving him bad directions. It rerouted us into an industrial district neither of us recognized. Empty warehouses, stacks of shipping containers, and half-lit smokestacks, still belching into the dark. I remember looking out the window and noticing how quiet it was. No workers, no passing trains, no sound but the car's tires on cracked pavement. The air had a stale, metallic taste to it, the kind you usually catch near scrapyards. And even Joel, who could normally sleep through anything, sat up and asked where we were. Derek said we'd cut through and rejoin the interstate, but the further we drove, the less it looked like anywhere that should have been open to the public. The warehouses lined up like blocks of shadow, each one with broken windows reflecting our headlights. Every time we turned a corner, another stretch of silent loading docks appeared, as if we were circling the same place. Marcus joked that Derek had gotten us stuck in some kind of loop, but no one laughed. After 20 minutes, the GPS froze on a single instruction: continue straight for 2 miles. Only there wasn't a straight road ahead, just another intersection with the same dim street lights buzzing overhead. We stopped at a diner that appeared out of nowhere on the edge of the district, a squat cinder block building with a flickering sign that just said, "Eats." Inside it was warmer, but not welcoming. The booths were red vinyl, the counter lined with steel napkin holders, and a single waitress moved back and forth without ever looking directly at us. She poured coffee, left menus without a word, and stood at the register as if waiting for us to make up our minds. Joel picked up one of the napkins from the holder and went pale. In faint blue ink, like someone had scrawled it months earlier, were the words, "You're almost out west." He showed it to me under the table. It wasn't written on the others, just the one he happened to pull. We tried to laugh it off, but none of us ordered food. Derek left a couple bucks for the coffee, and we stepped back outside. The car was parked where we left it, but the lot seemed larger somehow, as though the diner had shifted its position while we were inside. The road leading away from it didn't match the one we had driven in on. Derek insisted it would still lead us out, so we got back in and drove on. That's when Marcus started acting strange. He kept asking Derek to stop the car so he could stretch his legs, even though we'd just taken a break. His voice was calm, but his hands drummed restlessly against the dashboard, and when Derek ignored him, he leaned forward and muttered something under his breath that I couldn't catch. Joel asked him what he said, but Marcus just stared out the window, his face reflected in the glass like a stranger's. Half an hour later, Derek pulled over because Marcus wouldn't quit demanding it. The second we stopped, Marcus got out and started walking between 2 warehouses without looking back. We called after him, but he didn't turn. Derek cursed and went to follow, but Joel grabbed his arm and told him not to. We sat there with the headlights on, watching Marcus disappear into the dark. He never came back. We told ourselves he'd meet us back at the car if we gave him a minute, but an hour passed and there was no sign of him. Finally, we drove on, promising to circle back once we hit a main road. Only we never did. The buildings grew taller, their walls unmarked. No signs, no windows, just endless blank facades. Derek muttered that his fuel gauge was dropping faster than it should. Joel said maybe we should just stop and wait until daylight, but Derek pressed harder on the gas. Sometime after 4 in the morning, Joel leaned forward and said he needed air. Derek locked the doors, told him not to even think about it, But Joel's face was already pale with sweat. He whispered that the diner hadn't been real, that Marcus wasn't gone, that he was still walking just ahead of us, waiting for us to follow. Before either of us could stop him, Joel popped the back door open at a slow roll and stepped out into the road. We watched in the mirrors as he drifted into the shadows between the warehouses, his figure swallowed almost instantly by the dark. By then, Derek was gripping the wheel so hard, his knuckles cracked. He didn't speak, just drove faster, the tires squealing around corners. I tried the GPS again, but the screen was black. My phone wouldn't power on. Even the radio gave nothing but static no matter how far I turned the dial. Near dawn, the warehouses finally thinned, and we spotted a highway sign pointing west. Derek let out a long breath, as if the nightmare had ended. But when we merged onto the empty interstate, I realized it wasn't finished. There were only 2 of us left in the car yet. When I glanced into the back seat, I saw something sitting where Joel had been. Not him exactly, but the shape of a person slouched forward, hands folded in their lap. I didn't dare turn fully to look. When the sun rose, Derek pulled into a truck stop, and for the first time in hours, we saw other people. He shut off the engine, buried his face in his hands, and didn't say a word. I got out, walked into the diner attached to the station, and sat at the counter just to steady myself. The waitress brought me coffee. When I reached for a napkin, the first one I pulled had faint blue writing across it. It said, "You're almost out west." I left the napkin on the counter and walked back outside, but Derek was gone. His car was still parked at the pump's driver's door, hanging open, engine cold. No sign of him anywhere. I reported everything to the state police later that morning, but it didn't matter. Marcus and Joel were filed as missing persons, Derek as well. No bodies, no car recoveries beyond the one I left at the truck stop, no explanations. Just me and the napkin I kept folded in my wallet for years afterward. Sometimes I take it out, run my thumb across the fading ink, and wonder what it meant. Almost out west. Almost. And then I wonder if maybe the 3 of them made it all the way, and I was the only one left behind. I used to work as a traveling mechanic, the kind of job where you get called out to fix rigs that break down miles from anywhere. In 2021, I was dispatched to a stretch of desert highway near Goldfield, Nevada. A trucker had reported a suspicious vehicle abandoned on the shoulder, and Highway Patrol wanted someone on hand who could help tow if needed. The summer air was dry enough to chap your lips in minutes, and the light hung low in that dusty orange way it does when evening approaches, and the whole desert feels like it's waiting for the dark. I pulled over when I spotted the car, a battered sedan with its hood half raised, like someone had given up halfway through checking it. 2 men were standing a few feet from the vehicle. Both dressed in clothes that didn't fit, right sleeves, too long, collars too tight. They weren't talking, just standing shoulder to shoulder, as if they had been waiting specifically for me. I rolled down the window and asked if they needed assistance, but neither answered at first. After a long pause, the taller one said the car wasn't theirs. His voice was flat, rehearsed, almost like he was reading from a page. Dispatch confirmed over the radio that the plates came back stolen, registered to a carjacking out of Reno. That's when I noticed the way both men shifted at the same time, as if the word stolen had stirred something rehearsed between them. They glanced at each other, then at me, their expressions empty of concern. When I said Highway Patrol was on the way, The shorter man smiled faintly. Not the way you smile at good news, but as though I had finally said the one thing he had been waiting for. I stayed in my truck with the engine running, feeling the temperature in the cab rise as the sun bled away behind the hills. The two men never approached, never shouted, never tried to leave. They just stood there, beside the broken car hands, hanging at their sides, faces locked in an expression that wasn't quite calm and wasn't quite hostile. It was something stranger, as though they had all the time in the world, as though they weren't the ones stranded. By the time the patrol cruiser arrived, the men had stepped off the shoulder and into the desert. Not running, not sneaking, just walking in a slow, steady line straight into open country. The officers tried calling after them, but they didn't turn or break stride. One of the troopers followed a short distance before losing them in the brush. When he came back, his uniform was streaked with dust, and he swore it was like chasing figures that dissolved each time you closed the gap. The sedan was hauled off on a flatbed, and I returned to my own truck. That's when I realized my passenger door was unlocked. I was certain I had locked it before stepping out, because I always did. On the seat was a folded highway map, not mine, printed decades earlier, yellowed at the edges. A line was drawn in red ink, cutting across the Nevada border into California, and at the end of it was a circle with a date scrawled beside it, 3 days in the future. I gave the map to the officers, but it didn't matter. No record of the men, no trace of where they had gone, and no answers about who had been carrying that map or why it was left behind in my truck. The troopers told me to head home and forget about it, but it's not the kind of thing you forget. Every time I drive through Goldfield now, I glance at the desert shoulders, half expecting to see two figures standing perfectly still, waiting for the next set of headlights to stop. That was the last account I wanted to share tonight. Looking back on these stories, I'm reminded that none of them happened in places designed to be frightening. They weren't haunted houses or dark forests or even the kind of landmarks people whisper about. They were highways, diners, airports, small towns, and quiet corners that should have been safe. That's what unsettles me most. The settings were always ordinary, yet the details refused to line up, leaving me with a lingering unease that still clings years later. I don't think the scariest moments in life are the ones where danger shouts at you from across the street. The ones that follow you into adulthood are quieter. A diner napkin with words no one should have written. A neighbor who walks into a locked chapel. A stranger who knows your name but not your face. These are the moments that stay because they blur the line between the explainable and the impossible. And maybe that's why we keep telling them. Not to chase fear, but to make sense of the small breaks in reality that never mend. We gather these memories, polish them into stories, and hope that sharing them helps us carry them. Tonight, I've given you the ones I still can't let go of, and I think they'll stay with you the way they've stayed with me. Not loud, not violent, but quiet enough to echo in the back of your mind when the lights are low. Thank you for staying with me through every story tonight. It means something to share these memories with someone willing to listen until the end. If you'd like to hear more nights like this, you can follow the channel, share it with a friend, and subscribe for future evenings. And tell me, have you ever been in a place that looked perfectly ordinary, yet felt completely wrong for reasons you couldn't explain?